Chapter 12. But, but that was absurd. Impossible. He was supposed to be running away to sea. Quite without any proper introduction, I exclaimed, "What in heaven's name are you doing here?" He arched his golden eyebrows. "You presume an acquaintance, miss?" "For mercy's sake, I presume nothing." Indignation and surprise spurred me to sit up straight, not without difficulty and ill temper. "I know who you are, Tukey." "Don't call me that." "Very well, Lord Tewkesbury at sea. What are you doing barefoot in a boat?" "One might with equal justice ask what a snip of a girl is doing all gathered up as a widow." Sharpening his tone, grew ever more aristocratic. "Oh," I shot back, "a cabin boy with an Eton accent. Oh, a widow with no wedding ring?" Not being able to see my hands bound behind my back, I hadn't realized. But now, propped upright by my bustle and working my fingers against the cords that bound my wrists, I exclaimed, "What are you to take my gloves for?" "They," corrected his lordship the Viscount. "Plural, 2 of them. They wanted to steal your ring and found none." Despite his arrogant, lecturing air, I could see how ashen his face was, could see his lips trembling as he spoke. "They went through your pockets as well, finding a few shillings, some hairpins, 3 licorice sticks, a rather filthy handkerchief. Indeed," I tried to quell this recitation, with the thought that, while I was unconscious, strange men had put their hands into my pockets. The very idea made me shudder. Thankfully, they had not actually touched my person, for my improvised wearable baggage remained where it belonged. I could feel bust enhancer, hip regulators, and dress improver occupying their positions. A comb, a hairbrush, a flowery little book of some sort. My heart panged, as if he had just killed my mother before my eyes. My eyes burned. But I had to bite my lip, for this was neither the time nor the place to mourn my loss. "And as one side of your dress is sliced wide open, a glimpse of that scandalous pink corset you're wearing." "Nasty boy!" My misery-filled anger, hot with embarrassment and quivering with fury, I flared at him. "You deserve to be right where you are, bound head and foot. And how do you, dear girl, no older than I, deserve the same?" "I am older." "How much older?" I almost told him before I remembered I must reveal my age to no one. Confound him. He was clever. And, despite his bravado, frightened. As frightened as I was. After taking a deep breath, asked him softly, "How long have you been imprisoned here?" "Only an hour or so. While the little one was snatching me, it seems the big one was following you for some reason. He broke off, as heavy footsteps sounded overhead. They halted. A square of lantern light opened at the far end of our prison, and I found myself watching the rather ludicrous sight of a man appearing, from the back and from the bottom up, rubber boots first as he descended into our den by a ladder. "No more than an hour ago," he said to someone above. As he climbed down, I recognized his squeaky voice. Skinny, stunted, bent, this man cowered like a much-kicked and underfed mongrel. "Found him right where you told me to, in your wire mooching about the docks where they berthed the Great Eastern. We know what to do with him, but what about the girl?" "Much the same," growled the other man's voice as he descended in his turn. I knew that voice, too, and watched stoically as black-footed feet were followed by hulking limbs clad in dark kid gloves, and I could see in the light the lantern he bore were yellow. Many gentry, men and ladies alike, wore kid gloves, often yellow, serving to advise a certain social class. When the back of the massive man's head came into view, however, I saw that he wore not a gentleman's hat, but the cloth cap of a labourer. I was prepared, then, when he turned around and I saw his face. It was indeed the cold white face that had peered like a baleful moon into my railway car compartment, or a baleful white skull as he removed his cap. I saw that he was quite bald, disgustingly so, like a maggot, except for bristles of wiry reddish hair protruding from his ears. "I thought ye were after only in case I missed me mark," said the other. "To make doubly sure, yes," drawled the big, bold one, "but also because she says her name is Holmes." As he spoke to his companion, he watched my face with malicious enjoyment, smirking as my eyes flew open and my jaw dropped. I could not help showing my shock, for how did he know who I was? How could he possibly know? Satisfied by my reaction, he turned back to his companion. "She says she's related to Sherlock Holmes. If that is true, there is swag to be got for her." Why did ye try to kill her then? So this bulky man with the hair in his ears was, as I had surmised, the cutthroat who had attacked me. He shrugged his burly shoulders. She vexed me, he said with chill indifference. I managed to close my gaping mouth as things began to make sense. He had been looking for me on the train. He had followed me from the station. Yet nothing made sense. Why, accosting me, had he thought I knew where Lord Tewkesbury was? Shrew. The cutthroat looked straight at me with eyes like black ice. Something I could not think what familiar about that glare, although I'll not deny it scared me so badly that I shook. He told me, girls hereabouts mostly don't have the shillings for corsets. I sliced a few bellies wide open in my time. Don't cross me again. I sat silent, unable to think of any suitable reply. In truth, frightened witless. But then the other man, the rickety one, spoilt the effort by saying to his companion, Well, you better watch yourself and don't make Sherlock Holmes vexed either. What I hear, you don't want fool with that gent. The big one turned on him. I fool with whoever I please. His tone menaced like a knife blade. I'm going to sleep. You got these two. That were my intention anyway, the other muttered, but only after the hulking brute had disappeared back up the ladder. The skinny one, the mongrel watchdog, settled himself with his back against the ladder and stared at us with vicious little eyes. I demanded of him, Who are you? Even in the dim light of the oil lamp, I could see that his yellow grin lacked several teeth. Prince Charmant de Horseapple at your service, he told me. An obvious falsehood. I scowled at him. While we're doing introductions, said Lord Tewkesbury to me, what pray tell is your name? I shook my head at him. No talking, squeaky voice said. What, I asked him coldly, do you and your friend intend to do with us? Take you dancing, late dearies, I told ye, no talking. Unwilling to amuse this reprehensible person any longer, I lay down sideward on the bare planks, with the cut portion of my dress beneath me. I closed my eyes. It is difficult to sleep, or even pretend to sleep, with one's hands tied behind one. To make matters worse, the tips of my steel corset ribs jabbed me painfully under the arms. My thoughts, as well as my body, were far from comfortable. The mention of swag indicated money, leading me to conclude that I was being held for ransom. I could not imagine a more humiliating way to be returned to my brothers, who would no doubt then send me off to boarding school with a spanking. I wondered whether they would take my money away. I wondered how the big ruffian had learned of me to follow me. And even more appalling, had learned of Viscount Tewkesbury, and why had his mongrel little accomplice about him. I wondered what much the same meant. Quivering with terror, I urged myself to be alert, for any chance to escape. Yet at the same time I knew I would be wise to breathe more calmly, stop trembling, muster my energy, try to sleep. Because of the shape of the boat's hull, I lay on an incline somewhat hammock-shaped, but far from restful, even with all the padding of oar. Shifting my limbs, I tried for a less cramped position, without success, because the steel ribs of my confounded corset now not only tormented my arms, but at the other end had poked through the rent of my dress, reminding me all too painfully of how the cutthroat's knife had steel knife. I lay very still. Oh, if only I could. After a moment's thought, I opened my eyes, just enough to take a peek at Squeaky, the watchdog, through my eyelashes. How fortunate that my modesty had made me lie upon my right side facing him, in order to conceal my corset. He still sat with his back against the ladder, but with his head lolling, asleep. But why not? For as long as he remained in position by the ladder, how could we possibly get past him? But I would deal with that problem later. As silently as I could, I turned my upper portion of my person, trying to place my bounded wrists against a protruding rib of my corset. It was not easy, as the sash in my dress was at the side, but by straining one arm to the utmost while propping myself up on the elbow of the other, I clenching my teeth to keep from making a sound, I contrived to loop the cord that bound my wrists around the tip of a steel corset stay. So twisted that I could barely move, I nevertheless managed to force back the heavily starched fabric that sheared the steel. Then, even more contorted, I began to cut through the cords. Not once did I look at Lord Tewkesbury. I tried to think of him as little as possible, and then only to assure myself he must be asleep. Otherwise, I would have felt the mortification of my posture beyond bearing. Back and forth, with great difficulty I sawed away with my hands and arms while pressing my bound wrists against the steel. Painfully, and for quite a long time. I cannot say how many foul hours ensued, but there was no telling night from day in that hole. There was no telling either whether I was making any progress against the cords, for I could not see what I was doing. I could feel that I was cutting myself, but I clenched my jaw and bore down on the bowed down all the harder, my gaze fixed on the sleeping guard, my ears straining to hear beyond my own panting breath. I felt more than heard the lappings of waves, the slopping of bilge water, the occasional muffled bump as the boat drifted against its pier. Squeaky twitched as if festered by a flea. I had just time to flatten myself, hands hidden from his view behind my back, before he opened his eyes. "See here," he complained, glaring at me. "What you rocking the bloody boat for?